coming, the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere.
Welcome back to my show. This month we're going to be interviewing another veteran who's going to talk about his military life. For those of you who never had the honor of wearing the uniform, this will give you some idea of what it's like to be in the military and to see what military life is like so that you understand a little bit about what we did. And for you veterans out there, it's a reminder what we did to perfect our country and the people in it. October 13th of this month, the United States Navy celebrated its 250th birthday. It is 1 year older than the country that it serves. It started out small. There were 4 ships, and on one of those ships was a young lieutenant who was able to hoist the American flag on the first American warship. His name was Lieutenant John Paul Jones. He was also with that squadron when they went down to Nassau in the Bahamas and were able to raise the American flag over the first foreign part. He went back to Congress and asked to get another command of a ship for himself. And when he did that, he said, "Give me a ship, a fast ship, so I can go in harm's way." They gave him a fast ship, and that ship was the USS Ranger. The Ranger and John Paul Jones went to the coast of Britain and raised all kinds of terroristic acts on the merchantmen and the people in Britain. At the end of it, he was looking for a British warship to attack, and he ran into the HMS Drake, which was basically the same size as his ship. He attacked. It was a long battle. There was a lot of destruction and a lot of casualties. But he was able to survive and capture the Drake. He then went to France, and with the help of Benjamin Franklin, he was able to secure another ship from the French. He named it Bonhomme Richard, which was named for Benjamin Franklin's almanac. He took that ship out and looked in harm's way. He went searching for British ships and found a merchant convoy guarded by a British frigate, the HMS Serapis. He attacked. The Serapis was younger, bigger, and also better armed than the Bonhomme Richard. The fight was long. It was deadly. There was a lot of damage, a lot of destruction. Part of it was caused by John Paul Jones's guns, which were old and exploded. His ship was sinking. The British captain yelled at him, "Would you surrender?" John Paul Jones calmly looked at him and says, "I have not yet begun to fight." John Paul Jones became the father of the American Navy. His spirit is what the Navy lives with now. His tomb is in the lower level of the chapel of the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And the Navy has responded to that spirit ever since. My guest today is Alan DeNormandie, served in the U.S. Navy during Vietnam, born in Chicago. He attended Morgan Park Academy. He enlisted in the Navy in July of 1967. He then attended basic training at Great Lakes Naval Training Center. Upon a completion of this training, he attended and passed training at Navigation School A and B in Newport, Rhode Island. In January of 1968, he was assigned to the USS Gurkha, a Goering-class destroyer. He flew to Subic Bay in the Philippines to join her. She was part of a task force stationed on Yankee Station off Vietnam. He achieved the rank of E5 and was honorably discharged. After his service, he worked for his family business, DeNormandie Businesses, for 35 years. retiring as Vice Chairman and CEO. Alan is a VP of Veterans Voices, a veterans group started to help veterans. Welcome aboard, Al. Thanks for showing.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
What was it that made you decide to join the Navy?
Well, it was a combination. I, at the time, was going to school and working part-time in the company. And I was going to school downtown taking IBM classes and going to night school at Elmhurst College when the United States government sent me a notice they'd like me to report. So I talked to my dad, and my dad was a Navy guy during World War II. And I talked to my grandfather, who was an Army guy in World War I, and they said, well, you know, this is an opportunity or it could be a challenge. And the opportunity was, what do you really want to do? So I thought about what was going on in Vietnam, and I talked to my dad, and we talked about, well, all we really have to do is go to school full-time. I had been wanting to go to Elmhurst anyway. At the time, I was going to UMKC in Kansas City, primarily because one of our clients, TWA, was headquarters there, and my mom and dad could fly there and visit me and be a business trip. You know, my dad was always figuring out a way to make sure he could see the family. But anyway, we decided that two things were in consideration. I really didn't necessarily want to go in the Army and actually fight in Vietnam, but I took a look at the Air Force and the Navy. And they had entrance exams, and I took both of them, and I was accepted at both. And I remember I was working, and I gave my acceptance papers for the U.S. Navy to my youngest sister, who promptly went down 95th Street in Oak Lawn and gave them to the Army recruiter. And the Army guy called me up with the phone number, and he said, I'd love to have you enlist, but it says here you're trying to enlist in the Navy. Any chance we can get you into the Army? And I said, well, I really would like to get in the Navy. So they gave it to the guy next door. At that time, right on 95th Street, you had the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army side by side. And so I did fill out the paperwork. And I filled it out for both. I was accepted both at the Air Force and the Navy. And I said to my dad, well, have they shot down any planes in Vietnam? And he says, yeah, but we've lost some planes. I said, have they sunk any ships? He says, no. He says, I think I'm going to join the Navy. So that's why I ended up joining the Navy. My brother was already in the Navy. In fact, he was actually on my sister ship. He was on the USS Storm's DD-780, and I was on the Gurkey, which was DD-783. So they were identical ships.
What was basic at Great Lakes like?
Well, I had an unusual situation in that I was not really in the standard tradition of training. Now, basic training for the Navy basically taught you three things. Number one, how to be independent from your family. Number two, how to fight fires. And number three, how to swim and save another sailor. Those are the highlights of training. Everything else was just done to get you into following orders, chain of command, those type of things. I was lucky enough that at the time I was dating my wife, and they asked if anybody wanted to join the Drum and Bugle Corps. And I had played the trumpet in high school, well, actually since fourth grade. And I said, well, what's the advantage of joining the Great Lakes Drum and Bugle Corps? Well, we have 4 parades during the summer, and when you go on the parade, after the parade you get about a 3-hour time limit, and then we take the bus and go back to Great Lakes. And I said, so where are these parades? Well, one was in Arlington Heights, and one was in Des Plaines, and etc. Anyway, they were local. So I said to myself, let's see if this works out. If I could have my mom and dad come and visit me in the Drum and Bugle Corps parade, I bet I could get 3 hours of time with my sweetheart and not have to, and of course at that time no one was allowed off the base. So I said, that is a perfect fit for me. So that's why I joined, and I did. In fact, my mom and dad came up with my wife Peggy, and being great parents as they were, they said, you know, we're going for lunch, you guys just do your thing. And it was a different aspect.
I guess what they say about sailors is true.
Well, I was missing my future wife because it can get a little lonely. But I'll tell you, the regimentation and the training really brings people from, remember, most of these kids were 17, 18, 19 years old, and many of them had never been away from home. So they wanted you to really be able to be thinking on yourself, understanding what the chain of command is, and that you follow orders no matter what they are. Fighting fires is a major issue in the Navy because when you have a fire on board, there's nowhere to hide. And lastly, you need to know how to swim and save a fellow sailor, because there's nothing worse than seeing somebody drown just because no one knows how to swim.
Did you ever think when you're there, this is not what I expected?
Well, you know, you had mentioned that I went to school at Morgan Park Academy, but Morgan Park Academy actually started out as Morgan Park Military Academy. And from 4th grade to 7th grade, I was actually in the military academy. So I knew pretty much about who the officers are. People had to get up at certain times, report to certain places. While it was a school, it was actually a military regiment type of training. So I was familiar with that a little bit. But there were times I said to myself, maybe I should have gone to school. But to be honest with you, my training really took off in a quick way. Even when I went to training in Newport, Rhode Island, it was quick. They kept you busy.
Speaking of that, you went to Rhode Island and to navigation school. It says A and B.
Yes.
What was this training like? Was it difficult?
It was the most difficult training that I had ever had. And I mean that seriously. The A school is, they train you to be a quartermaster. And a quartermaster in the Navy is primarily on navigation. They're responsible for the ship to be at the right place at the right time. But A school was so difficult. We had 926 people take an exam, and less than 300 passed that exam. So those 300 showed up at Newport, Rhode Island, and we were basically in barracks at the time. You took your everything you owned fit in a sailor bag. Sea bag was put right by a rack, which we call beds, but they were racks. They were double beds. And you would go to school, and the school was from Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5. And then on Friday, which was an unusual day because you were required to not only make your bunk, but pack everything you had and put it in your sea bag. And the reason was, Friday morning they would give you a test. And that test would go from 9 to about 11 o'clock. And then we would go to lunch. And after lunch, they were to report back to the school, and they posted the grades. And if you didn't have 85% or higher, you were given an airline ticket, you grabbed your sea bag, and you left. Well, we went from just under 300, I think it was 292, to over an 8.5-week course. We actually graduated 29 people to become navigators, or as we would call them, quartermasters. Then, what I didn't know at the time, but then they said the top 10, and I graduated 8th, you are going to go to B school. And B school was an additional 9 weeks of training, and it basically did air, surface, and subsurface navigation. So when I left B school, I was actually qualified as an air traffic controller, I was qualified as a surface navigation, and I was also qualified for sub-duty. I was originally assigned Norfolk, Virginia, and when I got my orders, I said, I'm going to Norfolk, Virginia. But the guy ahead of me, I passed, and I was in the 8th of my class. The guy who was 7th was sick, and I don't know what he was sick from, but they gave me his orders because they needed something in the West Coast. And believe it or not, I got assigned to San Diego, and on the USS Gerke DD-783. And as Jim indicated from my bio, my ship was not in San Diego, so they flew me to the Subic, and for 3 days I sorted mail because they were waiting for my ship to come back into Subic Bay. And Subic Bay was actually our home base while we were in the Western Pacific, when we were in the Vietnam era. I had to wait a couple of days, and then I jumped on a ship, and the ship was going to Japan, and my ship was actually in Japan at the time and was just getting ready to head back to Yankee Station. Now, during the Vietnam era, there were 2 Yankee stations. They were called North Yankee and South Yankee, and that is where all of the carriers did flight ops. They were far enough away off course that they didn't have to worry about gunfire, and our ship actually was part of a task force. We had, usually we were with a carrier, a cruiser, our ship, and we were pretty well sophisticated electronically. We would detect at least 1 sub, but sometimes I think there were more than 1. So anyway, that's what took place, and that's how I got to my ship.
What was the name of the ship? Who was it named for?
It's actually named for an Army first class that died in World War II. My ship did not actually fight in World War II. It was built in 1945, and it was towards the end of the war, and it never left the West Coast. So it was in Korea, and then right after Korea, they did what is called a Fram 2 conversion, which means they actually upgraded the ship from World War II armaments to more sophisticated.
You were diverted when you were going to Yankee Station, right?
Absolutely.
What was the reason?
Well, our ship was part of Task Force 100. And on January 28th, 1968, we were leaving Japan heading for the coast of Vietnam when we were notified mid-morning, it had to be 10:30, that the USS Pueblo was under attack just north of the 38th parallel and probably about what we thought was 20 to 25 miles off Wonton Harbor. However, the North Koreans decided to attack the ship. Well, we were totally unprepared. Now, we were with the USS Enterprise, which was the largest and the only nuclear-powered carrier at the time. We were with the USS Bainbridge, which was a nuclear-powered cruiser, heavy cruiser. It was our ship, and we had a couple of subs with us. Well, they gave us orders to report to the 38th parallel, and I will tell you that our ship was one of the few ships that had the ability to go along the surface rather quickly. So the Enterprise decided they were going to put an order out, a TAC 45. Now, for us sailors who are quartermasters know that TAC 45 means that they are going to go 45 knots. Now, that's 52.5 miles an hour on the surface of the ship. Our ship was a conventional powered ship, and we were not prepared to keep up with the Bainbridge or the Enterprise, but we were, and we actually did keep up, and we were running at 45 knots. We were 310 miles away from Wonton Harbor, so it took us over 7 hours to get up to Wonton Harbor. The only challenge we had is the Enterprise had 4 at the ready. Now, in Navy terms, that means for a carrier, they had 4 planes on deck ready to attack. We had 2 F-4s, Phantoms, and 2 A-5 Intruders, but they were armed with from air-to-air armament, which meant we were really prepared to fight planes. We were not really prepared to attack land or ships. So we didn't care. It takes about an hour to arm planes. So we launched our 4, and the 4 planes got to Wonton Harbor and chased the MiGs away. But all they could do was fly around and report that the North Koreans had already boarded the Pueblo. They believe they had a witness. They believed the killing of at least one sailor on board the ship at the time. And they were given orders to just keep circling the Pueblo and wait for the task force. Our original orders given from Sinpac Fleet was to take the Pueblo at all costs. Now in the Navy, what does that mean? Well, you had an aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, the biggest ship afloat. That one wasn't going to be in harm's way. We had the USS Bainbridge, which was a very high, sophisticated, heavy cruiser. They were not going to put that in harm's way. We've got this little World War II tin can that, you know what? We know who we're going to sacrifice. It's going to be us.
Yeah, tin can is the nomenclature for a destroyer.
Correct.
I understand. I was sitting on the DMZ when you were there.
Absolutely.
When you got to Vietnam, what were your ship's duties down there?
Well, we had 3 tours in Vietnam. At the time, operating out our home port was San Diego. We were doing at that time during Vietnam what is called an 8-4 rotation, which meant 8 months in Vietnam, 4 months in Seaside in the States. So the first cruise we had when I was there was in 1968 in January, and we would do primarily what was called flight ops. And our position was sea and air rescue. We call it SAR station. And what that meant is that we would trail the carrier at 2,000 yards, which is a mile. A nautical mile is 2,000 yards, 6,000 feet, not 5,280 like land. And we would also be 5 degrees off center, which meant when planes were launched off a carrier, they were given instructions to either go right or left. And our ship would be behind the carrier, either 10 degrees to the left or 10 degrees to the starboard or left or the right. So that when a plane would launch, if it had problems, engines would fail, something would happen where the pilot would get sick, they would be able to eject. And the reason they turned to the right is they didn't want to get hit by the carrier. The carrier could go by them, and we would be able to pick up those sailors that were airmen that were in the water. And we actually did in 68 pick up 1, and then on our cruise in 69 we picked up 2 that had to be ejected from planes, both from the carriers. But we worked primarily with the carrier group in what they called North Yankee Station, and they did all of the flight ops attacking North Vietnam.
What were your personal duties on the ship?
Well, on a destroyer like we had, we were a Gearing class destroyer, which was 390 feet length. Our ship had a complement of between 370 to 380 people on board. Our job, the navigation crew, we were in what was called operations department, which meant we were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week while the ship was at sea. Quartermasters were responsible for the first job of the quartermaster is to ensure that the ship is at the right place at the right time. If you've studied anything about naval warfare, that is the most important job there is in the Navy. If you are too early, you may violate a surprise attack. If you are too late, you may be doing cleanup duty. So everything in Navy warfare was always about timing and location. We were also responsible for the weather conditions. We took weather ratings, make sure the ship was not in harm's way from heavy storms. We were also responsible for the ship's time. We did the time clocks. We managed the time on board ship. And the other thing that most people don't realize is that on a destroyer, the quartermasters were responsible for the ship's log. So while you were underway, we took the log, and everything that happened aboard the ship was logged by the quartermaster. So we were taking not only navigation fixes, which was basically determining exactly where was the ship. We were also recording what the ship was doing. We were recording every order given on the bridge, and every activity that was going on was recorded every single day. So those are the functions that we did, and that's one of the reasons that my Navy days went by so fast, is that you were working so many things at such a fast pace that you didn't have time to be worried about things. And back in the 60s, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have communication to the land, we didn't even have GPS. I mean, we had to shoot stars like they did in the old days with little sextants, and we had some long-range aid to navigation systems, but they weren't as accurate as today. Our little trick, I knew the guys on board some of the carriers, and especially the Enterprise. The Enterprise at the time had this new radar, was called Spin 6 radar. And we quartermasters were always jealous of the carrier guys because they would push a button, and the Spin 6 radar would show exactly where the ship was within a 10-foot square. And we were out there trying to shoot stars and all this, trying to get radar fixes and et cetera. And all they had to do was push a button.
What happens if it's cloudy or?
Well, we do have additional things other than shooting stars. LORAN, L-O-R-A-N, stands for Long Range Aid to Navigation. Now what that was, it was a signal, a sound signal. And if you know about radio waves go out in a band. And what we would do is we would go down below the bridge into a chart house, and in there was a LORAN mechanism that we would get a fix from radio waves from 3 different points. Whenever you get a fix or position fix, we call what is called triangulation, which means from 3 different reference points, they cross. And where those cross, that's where you are. Now the LORAN was probably accurate to about maybe 10 miles. And the reason is that radio waves are affected by storms, they're affected by lightning, and the curvature of the earth changes it. So you get an average, but you know when you're 1,000 miles out to sea, 10 miles doesn't make any difference. But today, they just push buttons and they know exactly where they are.
Time zones used to probably kind of screwed you guys up a little bit too, huh?
Well, we would keep track. It's interesting. When we keep track of time, time is called GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. 0 is in England, okay? And every time zone that you go through, the Earth is really divided into 24 time zones. And at the equator, they are equally 1,000 miles across. So you hear that the Earth is 24,933 miles. Well, there is exactly 12 time zones broken down. The 900 miles isn't much out of 24,000. But the further up you go, it changes the time zones. And time zones are a very important thing in the Navy because obviously you want to be there at the right time. So you got to know what time it is to the position that you're going.
Right.
Yep.
Now, you were saying something about the different weather. Did you get into any heavy weather?
We did. We only had one hurricane in the Western Pacific. They called them typhoons, but we only had one that we connected with. And the weather instances that we had in the first 2 of my cruises in '68 and '69, we had one typhoon. It generated about, I think it was 15 to 16 foot swells. Now, for the people in big carriers, those aren't really big waves. But on a destroyer, you have to remember the main deck of the destroyer in the aft or the rear of the ship is only 9 feet above sea level. You only have 9 feet to hit the water. So when you get 13, 14-foot rollers, you're rolling waves over the back of our ship. So yeah, we did have that. And one occurrence we had was really unusual. was that we actually encountered a tidal wave in the middle of the ocean. Now, it's a phenomenon that's very rare, but in the middle of the ocean, a tidal wave is only about 3 feet high, believe it or not. And it's the one that we rode, we had radar, and the radar was showing the line of this tidal wave coming at us. So we steered ourselves directly into the path of it, and it lifted the ship 4 feet. And we rode that tidal wave for just under an hour.
Wow.
And then we fell off the back of it. And you say, well, tidal waves I thought were big waves. Well, they are. And here's what happens. When a tidal wave comes into shore, your shoreline is on an angle. When the angle starts to slow the front of the water keeps moving and building huge waves. So when you get to the land, that's why you see a 20-foot wave of water. It actually slows the front of the tidal wave, and the backwater just keeps on building. But in the middle of the ocean, there's no opportunity for that. So it was a very unusual circumstance.
You were honorably discharged in April of '71 as an E5.
Yes.
What is that rank called in the Navy?
It's called I was a quartermaster, but I was a petty officer second class, which basically means I have 2 stripes. When you start in the Navy, you have a single stripe, it's just 1 stripe, and that's a seaman recruit. When you graduate from basic training, you become a seaman automatically. That's a 2 stripe. Okay, that's a seaman apprentice. That means that you've had basic training, but no other training. Then when you go to an E3, you got 3 stripes, and you're called a seaman. Now the seamen are basically, for the lack of a better word, they're the grunts of the Navy. They're the newbie guys. They don't know anything, and they get all of the things that nobody else wants to do. Then if you apply, and if you pass a test, you get to be a petty officer third class, which is a 1V, and then they'll have the rating in the middle of that. And those guys, between the seaman and the petty officer third classes, they generally did most of the work, the physical work. When you are promoted to an E5, you are now the teacher, the mentor, and the leaders of operations. Then in the quartermaster, there was an E6, and this guy was in charge of our quartermaster group. Our ship had 5 quartermasters on it, and our 6 primarily did all of the paperwork and administrative things. And then there was 1 step above, and that would be whoever the chief was, and he would be the chief of operations. And then that's the highest on the enlisted, and then you would get into the officer ranks.
What made you decide to leave the Navy?
Well, I had a very, Jim, I had a very confusing departure from the Navy. I was asked, as most sailors were, unless you had some major issues in the Navy, they would want you to re-enlist. And they wanted me to re-enlist. But I had a family business in Chicago, and my family and my wife's family were from Chicago. So for me, I really felt obligated to do that, go back to the family business. But the Navy did not make it easy. They came to me several times. The first time was from my captain. My captain sat me down and he said, you know, DeNormandie, you've got a lot of time. You're an E5. You've already passed for your first class exam. So if you ship over for 4 years, you'll automatically be an E6. So you'll be a first class petty officer. You'll be doing the administrative work for the quartermasters. And I said, you know, we're going to give you a signing bonus. I said, really? He says, yeah. He says, I'm authorized to offer you $15,000 tax-free if you were to sign over as a signing bonus. And well, at the time I was married, and I went to my wife and I just told her what the package was, and she says, oh, well, you know, I'd like to stay in San Diego. And I said, well, I'd like to go back to the family business. So that lasted about, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And as it got closer to my departure time, which was in April, sure enough, I knew I was going to get some pressure. The Admiral came and he sat down. My last year, 1970, all the way to April of 71, I actually was ship's company to what was called Comdesron 7, which was the command commodore of the 7th Fleet. When I was with Admiral Bouchard, he started out as a 4-stripe captain, but was advanced to an admiral. And he sat me down and he said, you know, you've been to A and B school, you've got 3 years of combat, you've trained a dozen people on the operation of the ship. He said, we really would like to have you ship over. What can I do to make you stay? And I said, well, you know, I don't know. I feel that I have to go back to my family business. While I was in the service, unfortunately, my dad passed away, and he was the leader of our company, and they were expecting me to come help the company because they were kind of struggling and wanted me to lead the company. And I said, I feel an obligation to do that. And he says, well, you know, I know people. He says, you don't get to be admiral without knowing people. I'm going to make it difficult for you. He says, how about if I not only give you that E6 job, but I know people that'll give me the opportunity to make you an E7. You'd be a chief petty officer. Really? And he says, I'm authorized to give you $35,000 tax-free to re-enlist. And if you re-enlist for 6 years, not 4, but 6, here's the scenario, DeNormandie. You will have 10 years in the Navy. Believe it or not, that's halfway to retirement. He said, I'm going to give you the opportunity for you to pick your billet for the whole 6 years. And I'm thinking about this, and I say to myself, you mean I get to choose my job? Because in the Navy, a billet is what your job is. So I just threw out an idea, something kind of crazy, but I thought it was an idea. How about if I was an instructor for navigation school, working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday in San Diego, and never have to be on ship for the 6 years? And he says, I can make that happen. And I said, so let me see if I have this right. You're willing to give me $35,000 tax-free. You're willing to let me become a teacher in San Diego for navigation school, and you'll make me a chief petty officer. He says, I can make that happen. Well, I want to be honest with you, and I hope my wife isn't hearing. I never told my wife that that was what their final offer was, because I thought she would be choking me if I didn't take that. So we eventually did go back to Chicago, and that's how I got involved with the family business.
You're involved with a group called Veterans Voices. What does that group do?
Okay. Well, in 2014, we had some members of our church in Orland Park talk about the veterans. And a couple guys, Ed Kaczynski, big tall Ed, Daryl Wertheim, I and Bill Grizzle were sitting at one of those, after church meetings where you sit down and have cake and coffee, and we were talking about veterans things. And Daryl looked at me, Daryl Wertheim, who was the leader of our pack, said, Alan, he says, you come from the Oak Forest Church and I come from the Orland Park Church. Are there any people over in Oak Forest that are military? He says, we got tons of them. I says, we got guys from World War II all the way through Korea. He says, oh, okay. Why don't you talk to those guys to see if there's any interest? I'll talk to my guys and let's get together. So we got together and we sat down and we said, we really do have enough people here. We had, I listed like 10 or 15 guys on just our Oak Forest. And then one of the guys from Tinley Park Church said, well, I've got 5 or 6 guys. And Daryl says, gee, I got about 6 or 7 guys too. So we decided, why don't we form an organization? And we just called it Veteran Voices Military Group. Just kind of getting together and et cetera. And in September of 2014, we decided, well, let's formalize the group. And we passed the hat. I think we raised $125. So we started off with $125 and an idea that we wanted to help veterans. And Daryl was actually our strong leader during that period of time. He said, he says, I don't know what it is, but I have a calling to make sure that people don't forget about our military. A lot of our guys coming back from Vietnam were treated very badly. And he says, I didn't really experience that, but I know that a lot of guys did. And there's a lot of guys in our group, this baby boomer group that were in Vietnam, and they just, they're living their lives with a lot of pain that they don't share with their family. And we feel that maybe they will share it with other guys who went through the same experience. And sure enough, we started meeting, and we met with some guys from World War II, and they shared their experiences. And then the Korean guys did, and the Vietnam guys, and we just kind of melted into a group.
Yes, I understand. I'm a member too, and was my honor and privilege to interview Daryl. You went on the honor flight last year.
Absolutely.
How did you think of the experience?
Well, I'll tell you, when I look back at my honor flight experience, we went in August of 24, and Jim isn't telling anything out of school, but Jim and I went together, okay? And it was a very hot day. Boy, it was like 100 and something in Washington. But anyway, it was one of the 4 top best days of my life. I got married. I have 2 wonderful kids. And honor flight is number 4. I just got to tell you, it's true. I talk to people every day about honor flight. And there's so many people who tell me they don't want to go because they just don't want to be honored. And I told everyone I tell them the same story. I said, look, I didn't go to get honored. I went because I know there are some guys who can't go. And if you go there to honor the people that gave their lives, not that you get honored, because you do, but the guys who gave their life for this country owe it that we remember them. And I had an opportunity to go to the World War II Memorial. We went to the Korean Memorial and the Vietnam Wall. And then we went to the Space and Air Museum. Yep. And I'll tell you, the highlight of that day was I had the golden opportunity that my oldest son is a captain for Southwest Airlines. And he flew the plane. He flew us to Washington. And I had never flown with my son commercially in my life. And he was senior officer at the time, and he took the job from the pilot and made the pilot ride the jump seat, and he flew me to Dulles. And then he took off his uniform and put on his honor flight uniform, and he wheeled me around all day long. And I'm telling you, I have trouble sometimes walking, etc. And when I got back to Chicago, I was so pumped that day. I mean, my adrenaline was flying. I told my son, no more wheelchair. I'm going to walk through Midway Airport. And I greeted so many nice people, and my brother was there. He went on honor flight before me. I had my friends, my sons, and my daughter-in-laws. Even they brought their care dog with them, their trained dog, to Midway. The experience was just unbelievable. So I would say to anyone who is considering about honor flight, do yourself, but more importantly, do your family and country the honor of allowing them to recognize that you served it well, and our freedoms, we are, in fact, and many people don't really associate this, we are the first responders. Without the military, there would be no police and fire. There'd be military. That's all there is. We created the freedoms that we live under. And if we don't defend our freedoms, they will be gone. And we're the only ones that fight for the freedoms of foreign countries. Now, yes, the first responders, they do a great job, and they take our law enforcement and our fire teams, they do an excellent job of serving our communities. But people forget that those men and women today who are well away from our country, protecting this world from aggression, that's where our freedom comes from.
My last question, I always ask every one of my guests, how do you feel about being a vet?
Well, I believe I served my God. My second most important thing is I served my country. And I will tell you that if there is anyone who lives in this country and doesn't like it, I fought for your freedom to even leave it. But if you've never been to a foreign country or lived under a different organization than this country's experiment, I will tell you, you should kiss the ground that you live on, because to live in America is the greatest privilege there is from my perspective. So being a veteran is just an opportunity for me to have served. Yes, I was drafted. I didn't really plan on it. But I will tell you that every person who has served their country is different than someone who is not. And there's a reason for that. And whether you were in Fort Benning, Georgia, working in a hospital, or in San Jose loading armament, it is not any different than the guys in the jungles of Vietnam. We were all given jobs to do, and we did them. I had one individual who was a personal friend of mine, didn't even want to go on honor flight because he wasn't in Vietnam. And yet this guy, one of my best friends, was worked in the operating room in Georgia. And I said, my goodness, how do we send these guys and mend them if you weren't there to do that? You did as much as anyone ever. Everyone who served had a purpose.
Right.
If the guy in San Jose didn't give us armament, what good would we be? We couldn't defend ourselves. So every single step, anyone who served in any way in the military, we're all on equal footing. Nobody ever got promoted to the jobs they got. They were given jobs, they did them to the best of their ability, and that's what we respect.
Well, thanks for coming on my show, Al.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Please accept this coin and this pin.
Oh, thank you.
Fair skies and some calm seas.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next month, we'll be celebrating Veterans Day on November 11th. It's a day set aside by Congress to honor men and women who serve the country in our armed forces. We sometimes forget or do not think about what it takes these men and women to give up their civilian lifestyles, to join and serve, sometimes to fight, but always to do what is necessary to defend us. In some cases, they could get injured or lose their lives. So we honor them on that day. But in some places in this world, people show their respect and honor to the men and women who freed them from tyranny and subjugation. One of these places is Margraten, Netherlands. In the American World War II cemetery, there are 8,301 American graves, and on a memorial wall, there's 1,700 American missing soldiers' names. Since 1945, the families of that community have adopted one of these graves each. They bring flowers, and they learn the history of the soldiers that was buried there. People still are on the waiting list to adopt one of these graves. And they want to respect those men and women who are there, and also the people who went on from there and ended the war. In Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, on May 8th, every year, the people of the city have a festival to honor American soldiers who liberated their town from Nazi occupation. Yes, they remember, and so should we, the sacrifices American veterans have done for us and for the world. I want to thank you again for watching my show here on PHTV4. We look forward to seeing you again next month. You know, when you see a vet, either in uniform or wearing one of these hats or the shirts, you should go over and thank them. We earned it. Honor and respect.